Welcome to this webinar organized by the Proteins and Nutrition Group, the GPN. My name is Céline Laisney. I am the director of AlimAvenir, a French consultancy working on the future of food. I publish studies such as Alternative to monitor the plant-based trend and more broadly the evolution and the future of alternative proteins. I have the pleasure to be the facilitator of this webinar. And here's you can see our agenda, the agenda of today's webinar. So I will make a short introduction, and then we will dive into 3 countries' national policies: France, Portugal, and Denmark. It's not so often that we have an international panel like this. After a quick break, we will dive into insights from the research and on how consumption habits can be changed using different strategies, followed by insights from the field with the case of Sodexo, and we will talk about nudges. We will have Q&A sessions after each speaker intervention, so feel free to submit your questions in English if possible, if not in French, I will translate. At any time in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, but in the Q&A box, and we will have this Q&A section, so after each intervention. All right, so let's begin with a quick overview of where we stand in terms of protein transition in Europe. We all know that food production is responsible for over 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions and 70% of freshwater use. We all agree now that the transition away from high meat and dairy consumption and towards more plant-based diets is vital for sustainability. We need a rebalancing between animal and vegetal proteins. In 2019, the Eat-Lancet Commission on Food Planet Health brought together 37 world-leading scientists from across the globe and published the Planetary Health Diet, where whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes represent a greater proportion of food consumed. Meat and dairy constitute important parts of the diets, but in smaller proportions. And it's still a work in progress. A second and improved version of the Planetary Health Diet is due in October this year. So where do we stand now? Is the transition toward plant-based diets on its way? How did diets evolve in the recent years in Europe? As you can see here, according to this survey in 2023 from the Smart Protein Project, 12% of Europeans declared that they were following a non-meat diet, 12%. And as you can see also, this share varies from country to country, ranging from 6% in Spain to 15% in Austria and Germany. The biggest share, however, is composed of flexitarians, in blue, people who are trying to reduce their meat consumption and choose plant-based food instead. In 2023, 57% of Europeans consume legumes at least once in a week. It was 2 points more than in 2021. Legumes are consumed the most in Spain and in Italy, reflecting cultural and culinary traditions. And quinoa, tofu, tempeh, and seitan are consumed the most in Denmark. But in reality, when we look at the broad distribution between plant proteins and animal proteins in the intakes, we see that the share of vegetal proteins ranges from 30 to 40%, depending on the country. And at the European level, this share is not making any progress. This is the most recent data. So we can say that the plant-based transition is just beginning and need a little help. There are several levers to encourage consumers to shift towards plant-based foods, starting with policy levels. For instance, many countries have updated their dietary guidelines in the past years to take into account sustainability as well as health. These countries are calling for a protein shift from meat to plant-based sources like legumes, whole grains, and tofu. New dietary guidelines for Germany, for example, recommend that diets should be made up of at least 75% of plant-based foods. In 2022, the Dutch government set a national target of 50-50 ratio of plant-based and animal proteins consumed by 2030, and Wageningen is monitoring progress toward that goal, so as we will see later. Policy levels encompass a lot of measures such as plant-based meals in schools, campaigns to promote legumes consumption, carbon labeling, and so on. We are going to dive into example from 3 different countries, but there is also a European action plan for plant-based foods in preparation. Well, it takes some time, but we can always have hope. That's it for now, from me. So let's begin with our beautiful country, France, and I will give the place to Erwan de Gavel and Martin Laurenceau, beginning with Martin Laurenceau from the French Ministry of Agriculture and Food Sovereignty, where I used to work too several years ago. Welcome, Erwan and Martin, and thank you for joining us today. The National Strategy for Plant Proteins was launched in 2020, so you can explain us what are its objectives and its instruments. I let you explain all of this.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, good.
Thank you. So, and you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm Martin Laurenceau, head of the arable crops unit at the French Ministry of Agriculture. And along with my colleague Erwan de Gavel, head of the food policy unit, we are going to present the France's strategy for developing protein-rich plants. First, I will outline the main strategic priorities of the strategy, and then Erwan will elaborate on the food aspect of the same strategy. So firstly, I'd like to explain why France has developed such a strategy for protein-rich plants. These plants include legumes, leguminous fodder, and oilseeds, with a crude protein content exceeding 15%. They are essential for both food and feed. Additionally, legumes have significant agronomic benefits as they can fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil, helping to reduce the use of chemical fertilizers. However, France's self-sufficiency in these crops, measured as the ratio of production and consumption, ranges from 50% to 60% depending on the year, with significant variations in production and demand. And in Europe, this figure is even lower at approximately 30%. Self-sufficiency increases when considering all protein sources like cereals and other crops. There are major disparities between crops, with the highest dependency observed in soybeans, where imports account for about 90% of consumption. The shortfall in production, in particular for legumes, is linked to different constraints that are agronomic constraints linked to managing climatic hazards and increasing sanitary incidents. There are also economic constraints with the low competitiveness of legume crops compared to cereals and industrial crops, and also the lack of market opportunities and structured value chains. And finally, there are also logistic constraints with the challenges related to sorting and storage due to high segmentation and low volumes of harvested crops, with a lack of optimization of the shipment flow. So the strategy to achieve protein autonomy in protein-rich crops was developed in 2020, building on the foundations of protein plan for the 2014-2020 period. The strategy was developed based on multiple consultations with approximately 300 experts, including members of research and technical institutes. representatives from professional sectors and companies and environmental associations. So it is based on a food systems approach and focuses on three main priorities: reducing dependence on imports of protein-rich materials, particularly soybeans from third countries; improving food autonomy for French farms at the farm, territorial, and sectoral levels; and increasing the production and consumption of protein-rich plants for human food. To achieve these goals, the strategy is structured around 7 key axes with more than 30 actions. I'm going just to describe quickly those axes. So leading the transition towards diversified cropping systems rich in legumes, strengthening farm-level food autonomy and the use of fodder proteins, supporting crop livestock synergies at both sectoral and territorial levels, positioning France as a leader in protein-rich plants for human consumption, mobilizing resources for research, innovation, and training, promoting a European-level strategy and developing international partnerships, and finally monitoring and evaluating the strategy. So the strategy aims to reach 2 million hectares of legumes by 2030, while maintaining oilseed crop areas at approximately 2 million hectares as well. So this would bring legume cultivation to 8% of the total utilized agricultural area. This diversification of cropping systems and increasing legume cultivation also represent one of the key transformations necessary to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets for the agricultural sector. The targets are about a reduction of 20% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. So those same objectives are also included in the French low carbon strategy. As shown here, the area dedicated to legumes in France doubled between 2014 and 2020. And however, progress has slowed down in recent years, mainly due to climatic hazards. So here there is a presentation of the main policy instruments that are deployed in the context of the strategy and were deployed in particular during the last 5 years. So at the EU level, under the Common Agricultural Policy, there are direct payments to farmers, including a coupled aid dedicated to legumes, and also an eco scheme that encourages legume production. There are also operational programs for oilseeds, protein crops, and fodder, aiming to strengthen the upstream segment of the value chains and improve production efficiency. And at the national level, we also have different policy instruments like public support to develop efficient and equitable value chains, research and development projects, and an agro equipment fund for equipment dedicated to protein-rich crops. So I'm going to focus on the first national instrument regarding legumes value chains. This instrument is one of, I think, the main innovation we had for the period after 2020. So this involves organizing and optimizing agricultural and industrial sectors to ensure value is created at each stage of the production process, from raw materials to the final product. And it aims to address several economic, logistical, and organizational barriers, with a particular focus on investments in the downstream stages. It supports innovative projects rooted in local areas based on collective approaches and involving multiple actors across the food value chains. The goal is to enable agricultural value chains to undergo transformation both economically and socially, as well as in environmental and health areas. You have some examples here: ecological transition, adaptation to climate change, development of alternative practices to pesticide use, and so on. And also a few examples of projects that were financed during the last years. So a project with the objective to develop local and sustainable soybean cultivation, another that focused on relocating industrial sites in France to source plant-based proteins for human consumption, or also a project looking for the development of a local fava bean value chain as a substitute for imported beans. Finally, of course, the long-term success of all such projects depends on the food part of the strategy, the consumption at the end. So this part will be explained by my colleague Erwan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Now yeah, Erwan.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So as Martin said, I will now talk about the improving the consumption of plant protein foods, and what we call it diversification of protein sources. And yeah, I'm the head of the food policy office at the French Ministry of Agriculture and Food Sovereignty. So first, a quick presentation of our national program for food, which is called the National Food Program, led by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Sovereignty in relation with all the other ministries involved. It sets out the major challenges and objectives for the food policy and sets 9 key actions, a lot of other actions. And there are 3 thematic areas, which are first social justice, including different actions related to improved nutritional quality and diversification of the food market offering, combating food poverty, and consumer information. The second thematic area is combating food waste. And the third thematic area is related to the education for young people, the dietary education. And we develop these actions through 2 cross-cutting areas, which are the collective catering and what we call the regional or territorial food projects. All of these actions are also set up in different regions in France. So this program is closely coordinated with the National Nutrition and Health Program, led by the Ministry of Health for actions related to food and nutrition. So you saw the National Food Program ended in 2024, and right now we are in the preparation of the new strategy, which is called the National Strategy for Food, Nutrition and Climate, which will be put into the consultation of the public in the next few days. So this strategy sets out the guidelines for a sustainable food policy under its different dimensions, so less greenhouse gas emissions, respects the human health, protective of the biodiversity, and promotes the resilience of farming system and guarantees the food sovereignty. It's been drawn up in line with all the pre-existing strategies and programs and their objectives and related to all the commitments of France at the national, European, and international level. And this strategy sets the big orientations, but the operational plans will be the next national food program and the next national nutrition and health programs that will develop the operational side of the strategy. So where do we want to go? There are, like in every country, dietary guidelines that are set up in the framework of the National Nutrition and Health Program, with 3 agencies involved. First, the ANSES, which is the Food Safety Agency, which is in charge of drawing up the food consumption recommendations, taking into account nutritional intakes and targets, the exposure to contaminants, and epidemiological limits. Then the High Council of Public Health, Haut Conseil de la Santé Publique, defines the dietary guidelines. And finally, Santé Publique France developed the messages for the general public to make sure the different publics understand these messages. So, for example, a few recommendations that most of you know, to increase the consumption of pulses more than twice a week, and the consumption of fruit and vegetables more than 5 a day, and to go towards whole meal, cereal, bread, pasta, semolina, or rice. So this is the direction in which we want to go, and we have actions to go there. First, I'd like to talk about the collective catering, which is a very important lever in France, as there are more than 80,000 collective catering restaurants, which represent more than 4 billion meals a year. And there have been progressively an ambitious legislative framework implemented. It began in 2011 with a framework for nutritional quality in school catering, with a lot of criteria, mandatory criteria. And for example, since 2011, half of all the starters, desserts, and side dishes have to be vegetable or fruit-based. In 2018, in the EGalim law, there have been a mandatory multi-year plan to diversify protein sources for all the collective catering restaurants, which serve more than 200 meals per day. Since 2019, in all school meals, once a week, a mandatory vegetarian option. Since 2023, for all the restaurants of the state and public establishment, a mandatory daily vegetarian option. And we will this year manage to review the 2011 framework for nutritional quality with new requirements, and for example, minimum frequency for legumes and for whole grain cereals. All of that is done in what we call the National Collective Catering Council, which brings together all the stakeholders of the collective catering sectors. And there is a nutrition working group inside this council, which has produced both guidelines and tools, for example, a recipe booklets for vegetarian dishes, to help the professional in the sector to achieve the objectives. Another area of action, the training of cooks, which is very important, with the renovation of the initial training. So first, a guide published in 2022, which outlined the challenges of sustainable food and all the legislative development and all the new issues that had to be addressed in the training. And inside this guide, teaching sequences as experimental workshops, practical work, or culinary techniques aimed at learning how to cook vegetarian dishes, but not only, among other dishes, to promote local, sustainable, and quality products, or to combat food waste. And this ended in 2023 with the publication of new standards for 4 diploma of cooks. This year we will renovate another diploma of agricultural education, which is called Cook in Collective Catering, with along these lines. And we will sign a framework agreement with the National Center for Territorial Public Service for cooperation, including on continuing training for cooks. The Mieux Manger pour Tous program, which is a program aimed at helping a multi-area program, which is part of the solidarity part, with two components. One component aiming at increasing the supplies of fruits, vegetables, pulses, and quality label products through food aid to make it easier for people in precarious food situations to access healthier and more sustainable foods. And technically, it's a financial support for food aid associations to buy this kind of food, so fruit, vegetable, pulses, and quality label products. And in last year, there were 13 associations which signed the 3-year agreement. There is also a local component aiming at developing initiatives at the local level to combat food insecurity. And last but not least, food education, as you know, is very important. I'd like to talk about two programs. The first is what we call the Classe du Goût, taste classes, which is a training program designed for teachers to reflect on really what it means to eat. It's been deployed in the territory since 2012, and it's divided into 8 modules. Each one is an opportunity to rediscover everyday and local foods through taste, smell, touch, hearing, and sight. These modules promote balanced and diverse diets and encourage knowledge of production methods and the rediscovery of our food heritage. And then the European School Fruit and Vegetable and Milk Scheme, most of you must know it, is funded by the European Union. In France, it represents almost 33 million euros per year. And it's aiming at the distribution of sustainable and quality fruits, vegetables, milk or dairy products in primary and secondary school, aiming at promoting healthier habits and improving the knowledge of agriculture products. And there is also a possibility to use a part of the envelope, the money of this project, to have actions related to educational initiative. So we launched since 2023, we have launched a call for projects to fund actions both to promote the program and to promote educational initiative related to fruit, vegetables, milk, and dairy products. And I think that's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Erwan and Martin. I think we have already some questions. I will read them, but you can also read them in the Q&A section. So the first question is regarding French strategy. When you talk about self-sufficiency, do you have the objective for the French farms to rely less on imports to feed their animals? In this case, this is not helping the necessary protein transition as explained in the introduction. Or does the strategy really wants to reduce our animal protein intake and also favor more plants in human diets? So is it plant-based for animals or for people? If I resume.
Maybe I can start and
yes.
you can complete. So it's both. The objective is to improve. The objective is to improve self-sufficiency of France in protein-rich crops for both food and feed. And it includes in the different key axes, as we've seen, the objective to increase actually the food autonomy of farms, as well as to increase legumes production for human consumption.
Okay, thanks. Another question, maybe also for you, Martin. What about soy in France? Public authorities advise recently not to eat too much soy proteins. So is it changing something in the policy?
Maybe this one is more for Erwan.
Okay.
Yeah, there have been a recent advice of our Food Safety Authority regarding soy and I'm not sure of the word in English, I guess isoflavones, which is an endocrine disruptor, advising avoiding all soy in collective catering to make sure the limits set for isoflavone is not does not cause a problem for children and all the public of collective catering. The main issue is not so much soy in itself, which has interesting nutritional properties, but the soy that is used now in France with all the varieties and the processing techniques, which for most of it has high level of isoflavones. But the Food Safety Agency identified there was many levels in terms of soy varieties and in terms of processing techniques like washing, dehulling, soaking, draining, etc., that can be used to eliminate a very large proportion of isoflavones to make it very safe for human consumption. So there are a lot of levers. I think the message of ANSES is right now it should be avoided because we are not so sure of the level of isoflavones. But tomorrow, with if we work with varieties and processing techniques, it can be safe, perfectly safe for human consumption, and we can eat it as much as we want. But right now, there are also a lot of pulses that are very interesting and that we produce in France. Lentils, chickpeas, whatever you like, which is widely used in collective catering, and that we promote in our policies.
Thank you very much. Another question, isn't it a conflict between the desire to develop an efficient and equitable value chain in plant production and on one side, and the market-driven logic promoted by the European Union?
Well, I think there are, of course, challenges to develop those value chains. So actually, the idea is to optimize the agricultural and industrial sectors and to ensure that value is created in France and at each stage of the production process. But that's true that it's not easy. And one other challenge is to get an equitable distribution of these value that is created. That's a policy instrument that has been deployed for just a few years. So every year we're also evaluating, monitoring the results and adjusting the different criteria you need to enter in those projects.
Okay, thank you. I may add a question for Erwan. As you mentioned, the SNOC, la Stratégie nationale pour l'alimentation, la nutrition et le climat, the National Strategy for Food, Nutrition and Climate, is due for this year after consultation. Do you think that it will update recommendations about meat consumption? Will it contain measures to promote more actively plant-based foods consumption?
I think you will have to wait a few days to have the answer because it will be put into consultation, I think, next week. And
I wanted an insider secret.
At my level, I can't say it right now.
Okay, I tried. So if there is no more question in the Q&A, we will go to Portugal. If Joana wants to join us. Joana Oliveira from Plongez, Portugal. Welcome, Joana. Thank you very much for joining us today. The Portuguese government has approved in January this year a national strategy also for plant-based protein consumption. So, Joana, tell us more about this strategy.
So, hello everyone, and thank you again for the invitation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the some national policies already in place and the strategy itself, that is a pledge yet, that exist in Portugal. So very briefly, we used to be the Portuguese Vegetarian Association before joining ProVeg International last year. And as you probably know, we are one of the countries that consumes the most meat and fish per capita in the world. And we are a small country, of course, this is per person, but still there's something that we need to address. And if you look into our ecological footprint, you'll see that food consumption had like a big part of that. So it's even bigger than the household consumption or transportation. So that's a big issue. And looking into the ecological food footprint, we see that meat and fish plays a big part, actually the most part of the ecological food footprint. But here's the paradox when it comes to policies. Portugal has a couple of policies that are very kind of outrageous and bold when it comes to plant-based. First of all, we have a law that mandates public canteens to offer at least one full plant-based option. That means a vegan meal option. So, and this actually exists since 2017. So we kind of were the first country to have this in place. And one interesting aspect is that our organization was involved on that. So this was all due to a petition that was actually signed by more than 50,000 people, then led to a public hearing in the parliament, then the political party presented it, and there were some concerns, but the parliament actually approved, and it was a law, making that Portugal was the first country where it is illegal by law, by state law, not to provide a vegan option for meals served in public buildings. And the law is in place basically everywhere, like daycare, hospitals, public schools, universities, prisons, other social services. But we also have the plant-based alternatives as part of the National School Meal Scheme. So here in Portugal, it's mandatory for schools / municipalities, depends who is managing, to have a 5% quota for plant-based milk as an alternative to cow's milk under the National School Meal Scheme. This part, the 5% quota, of course, is not financed by the European Union. It comes from the budget, the state budget, but still, this is kind of a concern to get for all children to be able to get their own milk. So this is, of course, like the school milk scheme in other countries. This is for public preschool and primary education institutions. And also, we have the lowest VAT rate for tofu, tempeh, seitan, soy, and plant-based milk and yogurt. In fact, seitan, tofu, tempeh, and soy, they have the same VAT rate as animal-based milk, but animal-based meat, and plant-based milk and yogurts, like soy milk or soy drink or legume-based drink or milk, it has the same VAT rate as the animal-based milk. And one thing that got a lot of attention since December last year was the National Plant-Based Protein Strategy. So the government here launched the reviewed National Energy and Climate Plan in December. It was approved, and now includes an outstanding National Plant-Based Protein Strategy. It's only a pledge, but it got a lot of attention because of the wording. Like, it's very clear that it's focused on diet, and it's focused on low carbon diet. So it clearly states that people need to reduce the consumption of animal proteins and promote the consumption of animal-based protein alternatives. That's why it's only a pledge, but it was very bold because of the wording it uses. And it says that this is for reducing carbon emissions and also to promote healthy nutrition while improving the self-sufficiency, that's the problem that we are dealing when it comes to plant-based protein all over Europe. So the two main measures included in this new line of action of the National Energy and Climate Plan is one of those is the creation of a national strategy to promote the consumption of plant protein. And the other is to promote the short agri-food chains, which is evident, because there's the thing about the self-sufficiency. And it also states that this needs to be done through public canteens, so to actually improve and increase the plant-based meals in public canteens, and to promote dissemination campaigns about the benefits of plant protein consumption. And this is like a few headlines of the press all over the world. This is actually very kind of famous because, like I said, because of the wording, and it's still just a pledge. How did it start? And I have to say that we actually were part of it. I guess it's also due because all of our work that we have been doing for many years, but especially we launched the Green Protein Project in 2021. And it's a project that, since the beginning, it seeks the implementation of the national plan or strategy to promote plant-based protein. This is very inspired in Denmark example, and IVF work. So we decided to create this project aiming that to happen in Portugal. So the arguments were the arguments tried to please everyone. So more food security, greater resilience and diversification of food production, better soils, less carbon emissions, more water, sustainability targets achieved, happy farmers, economic opportunities. So it's difficult to actually deny that we need all of those. And it's basically with farmers, with companies. So the cooperation is very, the strategy is very based on the cooperation with everyone, no political polarization. And we created this Green Protein Network that gathers more than 15 organizations. And almost all of these organizations are environmental organizations. We have the leading environmental organizations in Portugal that are part of the Green Protein. And we actually able to put the plant-based food system and the plant-based protein need in the agenda of many Portuguese organizations. The first step is, of course, to find a problem and an argument to actually work upon that. And we know that Portugal produces only 14% of the legume it consumes. And this is, like we saw in the previous presentation, we have the Mediterranean countries very close to the legumes consumption. This is a very important part of the Mediterranean diet. So this creates independence on imports and creates challenges for the economy, especially when it comes to climate changes and trade disputes. Plus, legumes are really amazing for the environment and for the agri-food system. So legumes naturally fix nitrogen, reduce the needs for fertilizers, and this is actually good to lower costs for farmers and increasing crop yields at the same time benefiting both the soils and the environment. So this is the main argument and the problem that we need to solve. Upon that, we actually wrote more than 10 documents in 3 years about the need for that. Some documents targeting decision makers, other documents targeting general public, and other documents targeting producers and farmers. We had more than 8 meetings with political parties and one big hearing at the Portuguese Agri Committee, which this one didn't go that well. It was just, I could see here, it's in Portugal, but you can see here that it was only me and 25 deputies in one room. So it was kind of challenging and difficult to have a good discussion, but I think it's the part of the learning. And finally, we have a meeting at the Ministry of the Environment last year in June. And we had a very productive and long discussion with the Portuguese Secretary of State for the Environment and for the Energy. And we ended the meeting agreeing to draft a document with detailed proposals for the National Energy and Climate Plan. So remember, this is before the National Energy and Climate Plan being approved. And back then, it was only this was being reviewed. So what we agreed during the meeting is that we would draft a document to highlight the need to integrate the plant-based food system in this plan that needed to be delivered to the European Commission as soon as possible. And then the Secretary of State for the Environment sent us 2 official letters. One indicated that it will take our contributions into account, and another thanking us for them. So basically, this is all after the draft document being delivered to them. And this we ended up having the National Energy and Climate Plan launched. and the line of action being publicly addressed, which is great. And why this worked? Why this actually worked so smoothly last year? So one thing that worked in favor of it is that the government had just taken office at that time. Like we had elections last year. We're having elections again, but we had it last year. So this is the fact that the government had just taken office, and you needed to close, like to finish the National Energy and Climate Plan. It actually the government was very open to contributions, that as long as the contribution were evidence-based, that would be something that they would consider. And so it was not, if we decided to just present, like to do something new, that wouldn't work, because that would like too much work. But then if we just decided to map out current policies and just propose some new edits to those policies that are already in place, or were in the time to be reviewed, that could work. And that's what we did. And after the meeting, there was actually public consultation, and we mobilized public participation in the consultation process. So people just needed to copy and paste some information that we gave to them. So that worked as well, and it's a very important part. And some partnerships as well. So the fact that we, to reach the environment decision makers, we were not alone in that. Like I said in the beginning, this was a green protein network with a lot of environment organizations. And so all documents and all meetings had the participation of at least one environment organization. So that was very important to actually make the other part to believe that there are not other important minds that are involved in the process. But there are still challenges. So there's the funding sources are not defined yet. So they are not. We do not have like confirmed funding sources for this. The timelines. The timeline is very long. So the government can put the strategy in place until 2030. And we do not have metrics for measure or even some evaluation ways of knowing the impact of the strategy. And for the next steps, we need to work with agri-food decision makers. It's very important because the Ministry of the Environment made the promise, but the responsibility for implementing this strategy, this National Plant-Based Protein Strategy, is assigned to two other ministries, the Agriculture and Health. So we learned that it's not only us that will be speaking with these decision makers. So this will be farmers and or healthcare professionals and companies, of course, because it's all business related. So it's important to put people in front of their peers for the implementation of any measure. And so there's this need for close cooperation with political decision makers. And when it comes to media campaign and to involve the press, it's always good to do it with cautions, like with praise, but also with appeals. And we learn also that it's important to win people over taste, because this is actually, it is like sometimes when it comes to organizations, non-profit organizations that work for plant-based food, environment and stuff like that, you kind of live in a bubble. And sometimes it's important to make people to understand that this is actually talking about tasty food. And this is not only good for the environment or for the health, it's actually something that we can put in our day-to-day lives. So after that, we actually have a meeting with the Ministry of Agriculture. We brought along very delicious looping-based products, and then they invite us to a second meeting of the following week. Of course, this is also it's only about the products. We actually have a very good conversation with the presentation, and again, very evidence-based. And after that, we were invited to another meeting with the City Improvement Institute in Portugal, and there's an agreement to form a group of farmer decision makers and companies in support of the legumes and the strategy. So it's important for us to get the network, to expand the network to include more key people. And so it's important to actually work work with farmers in terms of that we need to learn what are the challenges and the barriers for the implementation of the strategy, and now how can we please everyone for this to take place and for them to take advantage of that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. It's amazing what you achieved, and it was nice to share with us the making of these achievements. We don't have for the moment questions, but you can still write down some questions in the Q&A session. I maybe have some reaction first to what you present. I think it's very interesting to see that your strategies is encouraging both the production and the consumption side. Because if we do only if we try only on the production side, because if the consumption side is not ready for that, it won't work. So it's very interesting to see that you plan to act on both sides, I think. And so it was my first react, and I was also amused by well, it's not amusing, but the problem of the split of responsibilities between different ministries, between agriculture, environmental and health ministries. And so we all have the same problems, I think, with the separation of responsibilities. So it's not helpful. So if I understand well, for now, we don't have more detailed measures of this strategy. It's still in progress. It's a work in progress. Is it so?
Yes. The strategy itself, it's not developed. So it's only it's a pledge and a promise that is to be developed because it's part of a very important national energy and climate plan, but it's yet to be developed. Yes.
Okay, so we will have to wait and hope. What are the elections you are going to have?
When? The May 18.
And is it legislative or?
Yes, it's for the government. Yes,
okay.
yes. From the prime minister. Yeah, for the government. Yeah, it's legislatives. Yes, and yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I see. I have maybe a question. And do the France and Portugal strategies apply to both natural and extracted vegetable proteins?
Yes. So extracted vegetable protein.
And the person has added, when saying we must increase vegetable proteins intake, what vegetable proteins are we talking about? Is it
okay.
Yes. Is it also extracted and transformed proteins? I think.
Okay. I think I get like the legume-based products. We're not talking about that. Like the question if it was talking about the legumes, like the whole food, like the legumes, like the grains.
I think so.
So it only works. I believe that it only works if it's both. And even if we're talking about legume-based products, like we can talk about tofu and plant-based milk. That could be a legume-based product if we're talking about soy milk or tofu. But the thing is that we need the raw material, like we need not more legumes to be produced here in Europe. Here it's in Portugal in particular, but also in Europe. And but at the same time, we have the opportunity to enhance the value chain of the product. So it's important to take into consideration that we in Europe, you have the capacity to do that. And we actually do have very tasty and healthy and sustainable products, even if they're not the raw material, they are legume-based products. So I think that we have this part, the technology and the knowledge to do that. So if we're going to improve our self-sufficiency when it comes to legumes, and we need to do so, it's part of the food security, it's mandatory. We need to think that as an opportunity to improve and to get more legume-based products. So it applies to that, but not only that. The investigation is a huge part of the food security part.
Thank you. Okay. Is it some other question for Joanna for Portugal? I am looking at Q&A. So if you don't have more questions, we are just waiting 1 or 2 minutes because we are waiting for the next speaker from Denmark. He's a little late. Oh, we are a little early also. Thank you again, Joanna. And if you have questions for Joanna, I think you can always ask in the Q&A box, and she will be happy to answer later if you want. So I'm looking if Rune Christopher is with us. Is coming. We could have done the short break now because we have a little time, but I think he's coming. And I may begin with an introduction for Denmark. Because yes, Denmark is at the forefront of the protein transition, although it's a country of a large animal production, pork and dairy, and it has a high consumption of meat also, like Portugal. So it's very interesting to see how Denmark managed to get everyone, as we will see, including the farmers, but as for Portugal, around the table, and has reached an agreement between the different stakeholders to establish its plan. So we are Rune Christopher, I think you're here. Welcome with us.
Yes, thank you very much. And by the way, I'm sorry for joining a bit late. I just had something
we are
urgent.
A little early.
But I wanted to hear actually the previous presentations, but I had something urgent to attend to. But I'm happy to join now.
I understand perfectly. It's very nice to have you. So I made the introduction about Denmark. So I pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, great to see all of you. I can see there's a nice large crowd out there. So I hope I'll just test to see again just a second. It says I have to confirm my speaking language. I guess I should just choose English and see how it works. Okay, 1 second. Let me know if you can you see this here?
Yes, it's perfect.
Yes, and also now when I'm changing. Okay, great, excellent. So thank you so much for the invitation for this event. So yeah, as you know, Denmark is a country famous for bacon and butter and a very large animal production. We still have, as far as I know, the largest animal production measured per person in the world. So while we are a small country, we do have a lot of animals, and we're famous for also producing them and exporting them. 85% of what we are producing is exported, but also still, of course, for domestic consumption. So I will tell about, this plant-based action plan in Denmark. What have we done in Denmark? So what does this consist of, the action plan and the related policies, but also how did it happen? How did we get here? And I'm also wearing 2 hats. I'm wearing the hat of Secretary General of the Vegetarian Society of Denmark, but I'm also a board member actually of the plant-based food branch. So I'm also involved in some of the grants being given to the transition in Denmark. So first, what is it that has happened in Denmark? What has Denmark done? So to start with, I want to mention the dietary guidelines. So these, Denmark, like many other countries, have had dietary guidelines emphasizing vegetables, but usually also milk, for example, for many years. But then 4 years ago, we got a Danish version of the Eat Lancet dietary recommendations. So for those of you not familiar, you know that is the Norwegian NGO EAT, and Lancet, the medical journal, a very prestigious medical journal. They collaborated to make this average calculation for an average diet in the world. And then Danish scientists at the Technical University of Denmark made a Danish version. So they made some small adjustments, and that resulted in these recommendations, which you can see here to the right. And The two most significant new things are that the first overarching advice is eat plant-rich, varied, and not too much. And this eat plant-rich, that's completely new, to really emphasize that as the first word you encounter when you see the Danish dietary guidelines. And that is because, frankly speaking, Danish people, it is the plants that Danish people are eating far too few of compared to the recommendations. So it also makes sense to emphasize the thing that people eat too little of. Then there's also an explicit recommendation to eat less meat and choose legumes and fish. So now there's an active recommendation actually to eat lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans, green, mung beans. It can be pre-lentils. There are many possibilities. And that is completely new in Denmark. And they say 100 grams per week of these legumes or pulses, and meat is removed down to 300 grams a week. It's not that you have to eat meat, but they say you should lower it to that level. You can also choose not to eat, of course. So actually you have now a double recommendation of pulses compared to meat. That's quite significant for Denmark compared to what it has been in the past. So that also means now a lot of people have become aware of this, that we have to get to know how to use pulses and legumes. We used it in the past in Denmark. Historically, we've been using it. But compared to both, I think, France and Spain and Italy, where it's still part of at least some dishes that people eat, in Denmark, it has almost disappeared. So this is also a way of both reviving some culture, maybe from the past, but also learning from other kitchens in the world. They made some calculations of the health economic benefits, that it can have a value of between 1 to 3 billion euros every year if Danish people follow the dietary guidelines. 3 billion is if everyone follows it. 1 billion is if the population follows the dietary guidelines on average. So remember, this is for Denmark. So countries like France or Germany or Spain, which are 10 times larger than Denmark, approximately, the amount would probably be 10 times larger. So between 10 and 30 billion euros yearly in health economic benefits, probably in the larger countries. So these were the dietary guidelines, and I just want to mention it because that was an important thing that is a background to many things. Dietary guidelines by themselves do not necessarily change what people eat, but it's at least a reference. It's a frame of reference for people. So then what else happened? Then Danish politicians in 2021 made a broad agreement with the politicians from all the parties in the parliament, except one, except the Greenest Party, which felt the deal was not green enough. But all the other parties, all the right-wing parties, most of the left-wing parties, and then the Social Democrats who were in charge, presented this deal. It was a compromise where they still keep investing in intensive livestock production. There's also investments in organic and livestock. But also as a part of the compromise, they also took some plant-based initiatives. And so that is, the consensus and compromise part of it, which means that all these parties are part of a deal where they also support the plant-based. So it includes the decision to make plant-based action plan. And this was launched then some time after the deal was made. It was launched around a year ago, and this is the introduction. It's signed by the current Minister of Food and Agriculture, Jacob Jensen. He is a conventional farmer, and he's from the Farmers' Party, as we normally would call it. It's a right-wing party. Currently, they're in a central government. But yeah, he signed it. So that's pretty great, I think, also to show that you can also support this as a conventional farmer. And it says in the beginning, plant-based foods are the future, that there are many challenges in the world. There's a war in Ukraine, competition over areas. We need clean water. There's climate change, nature, biodiversity, nutrition, and health. And then I really like this sentence where it says, increased production and consumption of plant-based foods is part of the answer to these challenges. And I really like that way of writing it because, of course, we can't solve all problems through eating and producing more plant-based, but it is something that does contribute to many different things. So I really like this part of the answer, and increased, so it's not that everyone has to become vegan. It's not like that. but moving in this direction can have a lot of benefits. And having that recognition by the broad Danish government, I think is really something we're hoping to inspire other countries to have that as a sort of a recognition, as a scientific basis, you can say. They also introduced an eco scheme. This is under the Common Agricultural Policy of the EU, which gives a subsidy to farmers who are growing pulses, legumes for human consumption. This scheme in itself, the risk with this is, of course, the value chain of foods is quite weak on the plant-based side. So the farmers' associations in Denmark were arguing to the government they should not make this too rigid, not too tight. So what is actually happening with this scheme, they will not get it if they grow, for example, corn or maize, which is commonly given to animals. And they've excluded a few more feed crops. But they can use it if you grow fava beans. You can get it for that. And if you cannot sell it for humans, you can still feed it to your animals, and that's fine. You will still receive it. So that was again a compromise, which is tricky because, of course, you want to incentivize the farmers to grow something and to sell it for humans. But if you don't have a strong market in place, you will just end up prices being dumped. The farmers would be angry, etc. So that is the solution for the moment. But this is also just indicating that while it's definitely, from my perspective, important that we incentivize farmers to grow crops for human consumption, we need to invest also in the consumption, in the training, in education, and product development. We need investments in a lot of other things. And that is why Denmark also created this plant-based food grant. So originally it was at 90 million euros. They added a bit more funding a few times because they saw it was popular with many applications. There have been 3 to 4 times more applications than funding available. And later on, they even added more funding. I'll get back to that in a moment. 50% of this money is earmarked organic farmers. So, sorry, not organic farmers, organic plant-based foods. So 50% for organic and 50% can be for conventional. The board members have a very broad range of people, including myself from NGO side, but also the climate movement, the consumer council, but also the conventional farmers, the organic farmers, the Danish industries, the Chamber of Commerce, the labor union of food workers, and a researcher, etc. So it's a very broadly composed board that will make decisions on what to fund. And some examples. So the strategy of the plant-based food grant is to stimulate demand, to stimulate supply, and to build the bridges across the sector from the farm to fork. So these are just a few examples. Already many projects have been supported, but there's a round every year. This goes on till 2030 at least. So a few examples of what have been supported so far is, for example, a new vegetarian vegan chef degree. So they already had, they got a funding a year ago to develop the curriculum. Normally the chef school in Denmark is quite strong on meat, really. There's meat in everything. But they developed this new degree, which it will take 2.5 years. So, and they already had the first 26 students start in August, another 28 students started in January. And what they can see is they're actually attracting a few more female students. Normally it's males who study mostly the chef education. And not only more females, but they're also a few years older, a little more experienced. So they're saying generally they feel the whole education, the whole school is becoming more attractive because it's becoming more diverse, and then they can have a better exchange of ideas across different kinds of people attending the education. So this is a great success, and you can quickly make the calculation that over 10 years, for example, if they educate 50 chefs per year, that'll be 500 chefs specialized in plant-based cuisine over 10 years. Together, combined, 500 chefs can cook tens of millions of plant-based meals. So that's quite a structural change. Just one example, food service cooking classes for public and private sector, nudging implementation in various parts of the food sector, menu design, naming, doing all these nudges that makes the plant-based dishes easy, accessible. Plant-rich recipes for hospitals, which are suitable for elderly people's nutrition. Also, some of them can be mixed, how to increase legumes, but still having some meat in the dish. Stimulating supply, some examples have been to integrate pulses at the farmer schools, both in the curriculum and even in the meals being served at the farm schools. but also, for example, developing healthier products with great texture taste through fermentation. Again, the plant-based food grant is trying to encourage, you can say, milder forms of processing using fermentation and using organic ingredients, but still, they can still be imitating meat, but trying to look into healthy ways of doing it. And then some other examples, building the bridges. That can be, there's a project pioneering lupin and soy from farm to fork, collaboration through the value chain. And another project is a Plant Hub, which is a collaboration with a lot of stakeholders about data analysis and network events. So these are just some examples. So far, there are around 65 projects granted, and there'll be many more in the next round. So last year, then the Danish Parliament and government came up with this deal that I think many of you have probably heard about. So the thing that people have been mostly talking about is the carbon tax on livestock. The first time in the world where there's a direct tax on livestock. It is actually, for the Danish context, a quite low tax. It's not that high, but still it was very complicated negotiations because the farmers, of course, were hesitant, but they agreed. The farmers were involved in this deal, together with the farmers and the Nature Conservation Society and the government. So the carbon tax is there. Then they also agreed to take out 15% of the agricultural land and turn it back to nature. This is a very specific, I would say, Danish thing, because Denmark is so intensively cultivated. So we have major problems with water pollution, dead zones around in the ocean around Denmark. So it was pretty urgent. You know, the fishermen are losing they can't fish, losing their jobs, and you know, yeah, you'll see fish lying dead, the belly up in the ocean. So it was quite urgent. So that is the main reason why they decided to spend a lot of money to buy out farmers. It's voluntarily. It's still in a process where they will have to see which farmers will agree to be part of it. But the overall Farmers Association was part of this deal. But then another part of the deal, which for us, again, is very important, is, you know, they added another almost 60 million for the plant-based food grant. And they also decided to make the plant-based food grant permanent after 2030. They have not put a specific value into it, but if it continues even at lower level than the current level, that would be another 100 million euros. So you can see the combined value of all this means that Denmark has now already totally put 170 million euro into the plant-based food grant, but over time it might be closer to even almost maybe 300 million euros over the years, I think. Furthermore, Denmark is committing to work towards an EU action plan for plant-based foods. So while a lot of people are talking on the carbon tax on livestock and on taking out agricultural land, converting it into nature, for us it was really important that there is a plant-based dimension, because, you know, if Denmark reduces livestock production, someone in the world also has to eat more plant-based. Otherwise, we're just pushing the problem to another country. Then we might have more nature in Denmark, but more deforestation in the Amazon, for example. So that's why the plant-based part is really important. And we would, of course, have liked to see even more money in this, but we're trying to get as much as we could into it. Denmark's commitment to work at this at EU level is really great. This week, there was a meeting of the Council of Ministers in EU, all the agricultural ministers, and the Danish agricultural minister did say this, that he really hoped that the Commission would include this in some of its work on protein. So let's see what will happen over the coming years, and including Denmark's presidency. Also, one thing that we are doing now and planning together with many other organizations is a Plant Food Inspiration Summit, which will happen in Denmark, in Copenhagen, at the Royal Danish Playhouse, right on the waterfront, on 20th, 21st of October. This will be sponsored by some philanthropic foundations. We are now currently planning the whole thing together with, we expect the municipality of Copenhagen and the Danish government to also be partners on, together with the Farmers Association, etc. But we will try to strategically invite actually a lot of farmers associations, conservative politicians, government officials, because we really want to inspire, show that this is a positive agenda. We're not attacking anyone. This is about developing a new sector. So we hope that we'll get a lot of curious participants from all around Europe, and especially participants who are still wondering, how about plant-based? What is going on in Denmark? So we don't just want people who are convinced to attend. We really want to inspire skeptics also. Yeah, and this is the purpose of it, to really inspire the stakeholders, 500 people from all across the EU. Yes, so how did all this happen in Denmark? I know time is running. I might just have 5 minutes left to speak or so, and then we'll have Q&A, I think. So just briefly, what went before this in Denmark? So first of all, there were climate demonstrations 6 years ago, and that did show that a lot of young people were concerned. These were inspired by Greta Thunberg at that time. So that did convince politicians that they should act and make some climate targets for 2030 with a 70% reduction target of CO2. They only discovered later that, to really get such high reductions, you do need to look into the agricultural sector, and for some time they were thinking we can fix it within the animal production. But then we and many other stakeholders started trying to advance the argument that, if you want to have these reductions, you need to develop the plant-based sector. You need a transition into more plant-based, otherwise we cannot reach these targets. So how did we engage all these many stakeholders? I'll just come with a few examples here. First of all, it's important we talk about this as an action. Eating plant-based or a vegetarian meal or a vegan product or a plant-rich dish, it's not identity. This should not be about being something. That's very important. Secondly, we try to emphasize that, here in the middle, this graph, it's a colleague of mine who made it, but this is a hypothetical normal distribution of diets within a population. So this is not what people are eating now, but this is one example of what it could look like. Sometimes people talk about this, like it's as if everyone will follow the dietary guidelines, this one in the middle. Everyone, this is how we reach the climate target, by everyone being the same. But we don't think that's realistic. There will be people who eat more meat than the dietary guidelines, and you will have people over here who will eat even more meat, and there will still be 10% who will eat a lot of meat in the future. We think so. So that's why we are using the argument. In order to reach the balance here, to reach the climate targets, it should be easy for people to be over here. So we should make it easy for people to adopt a flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, or vegan diet. We should help people who are trying this to be over here. And if we make it easy for people to move in this direction, then we can leave people alone here and say, it's okay. So basically the idea here is to say we are all in the same boat. There's space for diversity. We can be different. And then on average, we can reach the target. And we think that's an important message to communicate, because there are people here who feel threatened that something will be taken away from them. And then I'm usually saying, if you really love meat, you should actually give the plant eaters a big hug and say thank you, because then there's still something for you here. So it's in the interest of meat-loving people to make plant-based food available for other people. We've been showing these future forecasts. Of course, you can never predict exactly when will the market rise a lot. Many people are disappointed in these years, beyond meat, Oatly, the stocks were crashing. But generally, when we look at the prognosis that were made in 2020, no one really promised a huge increase in 2025. The expectations were increases later on. And this is, of course, you can never know. This might happen 5 years later. Let's see. But the point is, everyone is agreeing that it will increase in the future, but you cannot know exactly when and how much. That also depends on young people, on technology, and on planetary boundaries, of course. We also refer to, in Asia, for example, there's much more acceptance towards meat alternatives. If you say India, China, in China, 50% of people say they prefer meat-like alternatives made from plants instead of real meat from animals. So, the debate in Europe can be a bit like artificial meat, we don't like it. But in Asia, this is a part of the culture that has been there for a long, long, long time to make imitations. So we should also be open to the fact that there are other ways of looking at this in some parts of the world. We started a network, we call it Danish Network for Plant Proteins, where people meet, listen, interact, network, and get inspired. This inspired the Danish Farmers Association, the Danish Agriculture and Food Council, representing the pig and dairy farmers. They invited us and the think tank called FREI to make this joint R&D strategy for plant-based foods. And that's quite unique, you might say, but I still think this, I hope this could serve as inspiration in other countries. Like, we have to reach out the hands to each other. And if it's possible in Denmark for vegetarians and pig farmers to collaborate, then it must be possible in other countries as well. But we need to build trust for that to happen. That was very important in Denmark, building trust to make this collaboration. There's no words about animals, this one. This is just about plants. We agree we should develop plants more. They started their own plant network. The Danish industry started the plant industry. So again, many things became inspired out of all that. We have started together with Organic Denmark, so that's the organic farmers and organic producers, this thing we call Danish Center for Plant-Based and Organic Future. There's a common website with a lot of materials for professionals. Some of these materials are about developing delicious recipes, but also how to nudge them. For example, this is in Danish, sorry, but we call it a title generator for plant-based dishes. And that is, showing, the naming really matters. We should call a dish something according to what sounds delicious, not just the vegan dish of the day. So some of my colleagues working together under this center, are developing tools, inspiration, menu design, all sorts of, and giving advice to professionals throughout the food system. And they can also apply for funding from the Danish government to implement some of this among food professionals. Inspiration that makes it easy, delicious, attractive in everyday life. And you might have heard about the study showing, as some years back, but they were, a plant-based default versus meat default. If you serve meat and people have to ask for vegetarian, 94% stay with the meat. But if you serve a vegetarian as standard, 87% stay with the vegetarian dish and only 13% ask for the meat. So you can really do a lot with defaults. We have had a business collaboration between the Plant-Based Business Association and a lot of green NGOs, where we found again a compromise, a vision of a more organic, more plant-based food system. A key was focusing on the market potential to really, we could see that when we focused on that, there were more politicians and ministries who wanted to listen to us. So for NGOs, we can learn something from the business side, that we should also remember the business argument if we want the ministries and right-wing politicians to listen. I'm getting to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your patience. I just have, I think, 1.5 minutes, a few more slides. This one is basically really to explain our approach in one slide, maybe. You can have one kind of idealism here that can also become fundamentalism. If you're so idealistic to change the world, to save the world, but you become a fundamentalist. Or there can be so-called realism, but that can also be conservatism. That, you just status quo, things stay as they are. So we are an idealistic organization, but we try to position ourselves in the middle here. But there's also another kind of idealism versus business here. Whole foods, organic, unprocessed, healthy foods. And over here, you can say business, conventional, ultra-processed. And our perspective here is, again, in our hearts, we might be up here, like we just put green peas here as an example. But we try to position ourselves here to really facilitate a conversation for everyone all along this, and saying we need food made from scratch, but we also need convenience foods. And sometimes people will have an ultra-processed meal, and that's okay. But we should try to aim for, when we make convenience foods, we should try to make them mildly processed, try to use organic ingredients. And of course, we still need to teach chefs and teach children to use raw ingredients. But we need many solutions, and we should not be fighting too much between these two sides, because then then we cannot get a change to the food system. So the Danish funding and the Danish action plan is really encompassing all of this, the entire, all along this. All the Danish money is going approximately 50% into each side, approximately, or all distributed throughout this. Yeah, so finally, in Denmark, we've had some advertisements with many stakeholders together sending a message to the politicians. This is just one example. We have the Chamber of Commerce, 7-Eleven, some plant-based startups, but also green NGOs, climate activists, and everyone together putting this advertisement together saying, we would like politicians to invest more in plant-based foods. This is really what I hope can happen in other countries also, that many stakeholders can come together and say, more plants, please. And that's the 4 key takeaways from Denmark. We focus on more plants, including funding for it. We try to build bridges with compromises. We try to build demand also through education. And then we embrace the diversity, all foods, but also convenience and technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juan Christopher. It was very inspiring. It's a very ambitious plan for your country. And again, we see the importance of stimulating both the supply and the demand side, to do both at the same time, or maybe demand first, because you have to find some to solve your products. It's very important to have these measures aiming at stimulating the plant-based consumption. And we have a lot of ideas in your presentation. So thank you very much. Maybe I will begin with one question. I think you can, I say to the participants, you can ask questions in the Q&A box. Don't be shy. My question is about, have you seen already changes in the demand side? How is meat consumption evolving recently? And do you try to monitor the effects of the action plan measures? We will see later that Netherlands is trying to monitor the consumption, the transition to plant-based. So how
so on measurement monitoring, so what is happening now, actually there is a full effect measurement system that is being set in place. It will still take some years after the first grants are given, what will happen and what will be the effect of each of the projects and in combination. But they are really trying with an external consultant to try to get the data at macro level and to follow that over the years and to try to link it to the specific interventions of the project. But that is at the larger macro level, that will take some time before we have those data. What we can see in the average consumption of Danish people, for some years, it has been slowly falling meat consumption, and legumes are coming from almost zero, from very few grams a day, going up, but from a very low point level. So I would say it's almost stagnant. But remember, all this funding just started flowing 1 year ago. So a lot of this is still very recent. But what we can see, I think, at a very rough level, public consumption in the public kitchens and some private sector professional kitchens, a lot of stuff is happening. They're really starting to add pulses. They're training their staff with money from the grant, or some of them have money from elsewhere. So that is making a change. When you train the professionals, that is a huge change there, and we see a major shift, I would say, in a lot of professional kitchens. With the private consumption is still very difficult. It's really, really difficult. Recently, there was a campaign with all the retailers who, on the same day, same week, they all made advertisements with a recipe for a bean burrito. And they all did it at the same time, all retailers coordinated. And then I don't know yet the effect of that. That would be interesting to follow.
Very interesting, yes. Because we have to take retailers on board for this kind of actions.
So I think that's the answer. You had another question before that, or did I answer that as well? Or
I have another in the chat. Yeah. I see another question. How do you manage to strongly involve citizens in this effort to accelerate the transition to more plant-based diets?
Yeah, so I think there are two answers to that. In the actual decision to use the funding and to make the government decisions, that was a compromise between different parties. And where some parties chose to say, we will fight for this. And that is because they were listening to us and others, and they were listening to maybe young people, especially, saying, so we'll do it. So that is not because the broad public necessarily supported this, but because as part of a compromise, some parties said, we need funding for this. Now, the tricky thing is, when you ask the Danish population, are you open to eat less meat? There is a majority of people who will say yes, if you ask in a very delicate way. If you ask, do you want to eat less meat, yes or no? There'll be a majority who will say no, but a big minority will say yes. But if you ask people, do you want to eat less meat? And you can say yes to a very high extent, to a high extent, to a medium extent, to a small extent, or not at all. the number of people who say not at all is only 30%. So this is showing there's a pocket of people who are open to it, but they don't really like it to be too much or to be forced too much or pushed too much. And for these people, this is our argument. Those are the people where you need to make it tasty, available, easy accessible. Some of them will also accept it as a plant-based default if it is tasty and if it's some of this is really about in the everyday life, integrated in the everyday life in a gentle and friendly way and in an inspiring way. And I do think the wonderful thing about the plant-based food grant in Denmark, it does support science, research and development, technology, developing products, but it also supports projects that are close to consumers, to the demand side, as you also summarized again. And that is really important. So some of these demand side projects can be involving consumers a lot. And I think that's the key to it, to be close to where the meals are served and also the conversation with people. But sometimes it's also about not talking too much about this. It's just about serving delicious food and then people will eat it.
Yes, it's a more convincing way. I really appreciated your conclusion on the balance between idealism and realism, because there's often this opposition between the different kind of products and your conclusion is very, very inspiring. Again, thank you very much. Thanks for all the speakers. We will have a short break, but stay with us because we have 2 more interventions after the break. So we will come back in 15 minutes and we will have some insight, very, very interesting insights from the research about consumers' preferences and also from Sodexo. So stay with us and we'll come back in 15 minutes. Thank you all. Welcome back to this webinar organized by the GPN, Groupe Protéines et Nutrition in French. So we have seen some national policies for the protein transitions. Now we are going on with some insights from the research about consumer preferences. And we will go on with Muriel Vérin, who is a senior researcher and project leader consumer science at Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. And Wageningen is a very important research center for alternative proteins in general. So we are very pleased to hear you, Muriel.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Welcome.
I will try to share my slides. Okay, so thanks for the invitation. I will try to learn you a bit more about the Dutch situation and particularly how we are doing in the transition towards more plant-based diets in the Netherlands. So first, shortly about myself, so that you know from what perspective I look at it. So I'm a researcher in consumer science, and my research is mainly trying to understand why consumers make the food choices that they make, and particularly in relation to healthy and sustainable food consumption. We are an applied research institute and part of Wageningen University and Research, but we do a lot of different projects for the Dutch government, but also a lot of pre-competitive research in consortia of public and private partners. So for food producers, for example, or retailers. And the past years, I've been working a lot on the protein transition and also on consumer segmentation, for example. A lot has been said already today, so not so new, but the transition towards less animal proteins and more plant proteins can have beneficial effects to individual health, animal welfare, and the environment. And there's quite a consensus on that in the literature. So that's the perspective that we take today. And the Dutch government has set a protein target. So they want to shift to a 50-50 balance in the Dutch eating pattern by 2030. And a lot of supermarkets and catering companies in the Netherlands also have set this 50-50 target, but already for this year. And they're aiming for a further shift towards a 40-60 ratio in 2030 in terms of their protein sales. So yeah, my background. So this one is clear for everyone, I think. So this is the one about the Dutch targets. So the government has set a target for 50-50 in 2030. And the supermarkets as well, but they also have set the targets to move further towards a 40-60 ratio in 2030. And the Dutch Health Council had a look at it, and they advised in December 2023. Also, they advised the government to set this target towards a further shift to 40% plant-based and 60%, 40% animal-based and 60% plant-based proteins. So in this presentation, I will first start with the current state in the Netherlands. Then I will move towards a part that I will explain behavioral strategies that consumers can take if they want to shift their diets. And in the last part, I will explain a bit more about the consumer perspective on analogs. So about the current state, some figures. So my colleague Hans Dagevos is already monitoring the meat consumption in the Netherlands for quite some years now, as you can see. And as you can see, not a lot is happening, only minor changes are happening currently. And these numbers are based on carcass weight. So about half of it is what we consume. So we consume about 38 kilograms of meat per year in the Netherlands currently. And as you can see, that's actually too much. If we look at the recommendations of the Dutch Nutrition Center, since they recommend a maximum of 500 grams of meat per week per person, so that this would make 26 kilograms a year. And if we look at the Eat Lancet recommendations, it's much less. So yeah, we can reduce. I also looked up some figures for the different European countries. So we saw before that Portugal has a high meat consumption. The Netherlands is a bit below the European average. So now we'll be started talking about the Dutch Protein Monitor. That's one of our own projects that we started for the Dutch government. So in 2023, we started to develop this monitor as a pilot to monitor the state of the protein transition in the Netherlands over the years. And it is composed of different parts. So we wanted to have a better understanding of what is happening in supermarkets, in the food offer. We wanted to have a better understanding of the consumption, so the intake. And we also wanted to monitor the drivers behind the consumption. So that's all about consumer habits, attitudes, emotions, all that kind of factors. And as you can see on this slide, in 2023, about 61% of the proteins that were consumed in the Netherlands were animal-based and 39% were plant-based. And the numbers of 2024, I was unfortunately not allowed to present them today, but they will be published very soon, I think in April. So we had a closer look at these numbers of intake and this ratio, and we saw that about 25% of our sample is already consuming the 50-50 balance that the Dutch government is aiming for. And that's particularly the case among the younger adults, so the 18 until 29 years old. We also looked at the different eating moments during the day. So as you can see here in the Netherlands, the biggest problem, let's say, is at the dinner occasion. So there, the imbalance is largest. So a lot of animal-based proteins are consumed at dinner. And you may know that in the Netherlands, the lunch is mainly consisting of bread with a lot of cheese. So also quite some animal-based proteins, but it's more balanced compared to the dinner time. And the main contributing categories to the protein intake, if we look at the plant-based intake, it's mainly coming from bread, so whole wheat bread, from other grains, and also from vegetables, including legumes. And for the animal-based part, it's mainly coming from meat, but also a lot from dairy and dairy products, and cheese, of course. So as I said in this monitor, we also looked at the different drivers of behavior. And this slide is on the behavioral intention, so the intention to buy products from the different categories in the coming month. So what you see here is that people intend to buy meat and dairy the most, followed by nuts and seeds and pulses, but the meat analogues and the dairy analogues are least in favor. So for the driver's part, we use this theoretical model as a basis. Some of you may know it. It's the COM-B model developed by Michi. And it states that for a certain behavior to occur or behavior change to occur, you need actually 3 components. First of all, people need to be motivated. And that can be conscious motivations. So for example, out of health reasons, environmental reasons, animal welfare reasons. But it can also be more automatic. So for example, think of emotions or habits. But motivation alone is not enough. People also need to be capable. And this is all about having the right knowledge and the capabilities. So the cooking skills, for example, how can you prepare a tasty dish based on legumes, for example, but also the knowledge on what products contain what type of proteins. And the last thing is that also the opportunity should allow you to conduct the behavior. And this is about the context. And this is partly about the physical context. So for example, the availability of analogues in supermarkets, vegetarian options in restaurants, but it's also about the social opportunity. So we know that if people around you consume a lot of meat, it makes it difficult for you to reduce. And also it makes it difficult for you if they really think you should consume meat as well. So here I show some of the drivers that we measured. We measured more, but here I show you the ones that are most differentiating between the different product categories. So for example, if you look at the habits, the meat and the dairy, so the animal-based categories score very high, and the analogues score much lower. And this is actually the case also for the positive emotions, for the attitudes, and for the descriptive norms. Whereas for the negative drivers, so the negative emotions, for example, or a problem with availability, it's the other way around. So this really shows that people are really in favor of the animal-based sources, and the dairy and the meat analogues do not score very well in this. We also ran a regression to see which of these drivers are very important for this behavior, so predicting the behavior. And then we saw that it's mainly the attitudes and the habits that are very strongly predicting this behavior. But also the opportunity is an important part, and particularly the social opportunity is low at the moment. Animal-based is still very much the norm in the Netherlands. So that brings me to the second part of the presentation on behavioral strategies, because the question is if we would like consumers to move a bit towards more plant-based proteins and less animal proteins, how can we achieve this? So we thought of different strategies based on the protein product categories. So first of all, we could consume smaller portions of the animal-based products, so smaller portions of meat, dairy, cheese, and fish. We could look at the novel proteins. A lot is happening and being developed at the moment. A lot of literature on this. So think of seaweed, duckweed, mycoproteins, all these kind of products. Precision fermentation also, of course. The third strategy is about the analogues. So the products that are really mimicking the taste and also the function in the meals, for example, of the meat and the dairy products. So the vegetarian burgers, for example. And the last strategy is about cooking with more traditional plant proteins, such as pulses, nuts, seeds that contain plant proteins. But this requires often an adaptation in the type of dishes you consume. So for example, more curries or that types of meals. So we wanted to get a better understanding of the consumer preferences in applying these 4 behavioral strategies and their meal choices. So we developed an experiment to test this. And I will show you how we did this. We selected 7 familiar dishes in the Netherlands. So for example, think of a pasta, a soup, a quiche. And each of these dishes, each of these dishes contained two animal products. So for example, in the pasta, we had the minced meat and the grated cheese. And then we asked the respondents if you need to lower your intake of the animal products, what's your preferred option? And we gave them 8 options per product, reflecting these 4 strategies. So I give you an example. For example, we had the pasta bolognese, and we asked them to replace the minced meat first. And they had 8 options to select from. So plant-based minced meat based on soy or pea protein, so the analogues. Or you could replace the meat with lentils or mushrooms, so more the traditional types of products. Innovative products such as duckweed or pulled oats. Or you just could reduce the amount of meat. So either use half a portion or leave it out completely. We had a quite large sample, over 2,000 respondents, Dutch adults, more or less representative, although the younger age category was a bit underrepresented. We had like 55% of meat eaters and 45% of flexitarians in the sample. And here are the results. So as you can see, the reduction option was by far most popular, and particularly to the meat eaters. And as you can see, the flexitarians, they are in green on the slide. They vary a bit more between the different strategies. We also asked, because it was, of course, all hypothetical. So we asked, what is the likelihood that you would really implement this in your own dishes at home? And what we saw here is that when people selected an analog, the likelihood of implementation was highest. But when people selected the reduction option, the implementation likelihood was lowest. And how I interpret this is that mainly the meat eaters in our experiment, they are forced, of course, to select one of the options. So they say, okay, if I need to eat less meat, make it half a portion. But if we ask them, would you really do that at home? They say, no, actually not. So that was quite interesting to find out. Then in the last part, I will explain a bit more about the analogues. We also did a study in which we asked different types of meat eaters about their protein source preferences. So we gave them a whole list of, I think were about 21 different protein sources, including mushrooms, which do not contain very much proteins, but they are used a lot as meat replacers. And we asked them to rank them from their most preferred to their least preferred option. And we included meat products, they are in red on the slide, other animal products such as eggs, cheese, and fish, they are in orange. And we included a lot of plant products in green. And here you see the results for 3 different consumer categories. So the meat lovers who consume meat 7 days a week. The flexitarians that consume only 1 or 2 days a week. And the meat abstainers who don't consume meat at all. So the vegetarians and the vegans are in this category. And you see that their protein source rankings are very different. So for the meat lovers, their whole top 10 consists of animal sourced products. And for flexitarians, it's much more mixed. But as you can see, the top 1 and 2 are still animal-based. And that's what we see a lot in our research, that if people start to reduce their meat consumption and replace it, they start to replace it mainly by other animal products. So by eggs, by cheese, or by fish. And that's not particularly helping a shift towards more plant proteins. And for the meat abstainers, a lot of their preferred options are plant-based. So recently, we published a book chapter on flexitarian foods with my colleague Hans Dagenvos. And in this chapter, we talk a bit more about the role of analogues in flexitarian diets. And to end my presentation, I will show you one of the graphs that are in this book chapter. It's again on these different product categories and on different categories of consumers. So here you can see meat abstainers who do not consume meat at all. And the heavy flexitarians that are quite close to meat abstainers, so they consume meat like 1 or 2 times a week. The medium flexitarians meat 5-6 times a week, and the avid meat eaters consume meat every day. And here we asked what product would they use to replace their meat in a meal, if they would replace it. And then you see, interestingly enough, that the meat analogs, so the yellow bars on the screen, it's highest for the meat abstainers. So actually meat abstainers are the ones that consume meat analogs most to replace meat. Whereas for the flexitarians and also for the avid meat eaters, they prefer to replace with mushrooms or pulses or nuts and seeds. And we often think that analogs are very much an interesting category for these flexitarians, since they can sometimes use the meat option and sometimes use the analog option. But we see in our research that it's more the meat abstainers that use these analogs. So that brings me to my take-home message. As you saw, 61% of the protein intake in the Netherlands is still animal-based. If we look at the plant-based protein intake, it's mainly bread that is contributing to it. We also saw that attitudes and habits are most predictive of this intake, but also that meat is still very much the norm in the Netherlands, and the intention to consume analogs is quite low. But what we also learned is that consumer groups really differ in how they prefer to reduce. So in their reduction strategies and in the product categories that they prefer. So portion size reduction, I think, is a very promising route for many consumers, also the more meat-oriented consumers. And analogs are most popular among the meat abstainers. So this brings me to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer some questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Marielle. It's very insightful, and I am very glad that you stress the difference between the consumers group, because there is no such thing that one consumer.
Exactly.
Consumers are very different from each other, and we have to take this into account. So there is some question, and people can still ask questions in the Q&A box. I see that they prefer chat, so I go to the chat too. Yes, this is strange. Where in your slide 30, I think, 30, yes, where there is a chicken fillet in the 15th position for the meat abstainers.
Yeah, we had that question before. Yeah, so they were forced to rank all protein sources, so there were a bit more. They were forced to rank all. So you see that they rank all the plant-based on top and some of the animal-based. And then the chicken fillet is the meat one that they prefer most, but they won't, of course, not consume it. But yeah.
Okay. So it's not
the last bad one in their eyes, let's say.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. It's more understandable. And another question, did the flexitarian who choose analogs realize that they are very processed? Well, I will add, it depends on the analogs, but
yeah, it depends. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion going on, and a lot of consumers also giving the degree of processing as a reason not to consume the analogs. Yeah, so it depends on the types of consumers. Again, but I think a lot of work is being done on making them more healthy, with less salt, less processed.
Exactly.
So I think a new generation of analogs will come.
Yeah, there are new innovations coming, and very clean label products and so on. So I think this is we have to distinguish between the products.
Yeah.
And I will add a question of my own based on your research. What do you think is the best strategy for the meat eaters? Because in the first step, you say that they prefer to reduce the portion size, but the likelihood is they prefer analogs. So between analogs and reduction of portion, what strategy is the best for you?
Yeah, I think the portion sizes is best for a larger percentage of the population. And in our experiment, portion size reduction was reducing by half. So it's I think it's quite a big step. But
and not replacing by something else, because
that's also
we can see also new products where there is half meat and half mushrooms, for example, in bolognese or some dishes like that.
Yeah, and that's also like the hybrid products are also coming up in the Netherlands. Yeah, so that's also one that's very interesting for also the more meat-oriented consumers.
You didn't ask some questions specific on hybrid or blended meat with vegetable. Yeah,
not yet, but we will start with a project on that. I think that's
great.
Getting more and more attention. I think that's a good strategy. Yeah,
I think it's a strategy very, very interesting, and we see a lot of new products in this area. Exactly. Mixing meat with plant-based or with mushrooms or with microproteins and meat, and we see a lot of different blended products. So we're going to work on that. So thank you.
I also think that some things can be done without making it very explicit. Like smaller portions can also be done in supermarkets in the packaging without really noticing, or the same for the blending. The question is, should you really tell that these products are hybrid, or just frame it differently? And of course you should put it on the back of the pack, but not really frame it as a hybrid product.
As Rune Christopher said before, the naming of the products, it's important also. So we have to be careful with that. Thank you. I will see if there is some more question. You can always ask questions to Muriel in the Q&A box, but if there is no, we will go to our next and final speaker, Nicolas. Nicolas, if you're here, thank you very much, Muriel. Hi, Nicolas. Nicolas Hamilton, you are from Sodexo, the UK Climate and Nature Director. And so welcome to thank you for joining us. Sodexo is the world leader in food service. So could you tell us first why Sodexo is caring about sustainable food transition, and then explain what was implemented so far to promote sustainable eating?
Yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here representing Sodexo. My name is Nicolas Hamilton. I'm the Climate and Nature Director. I'm actually part of the global sustainability team. And just two sentences on Sodexo. We're a major player in the food service industry and facility management. Our ambition is to be a leader in sustainable food and valued experiences. And we offer our services on a wide variety of client sites. This can be schools, universities, hospitals, sports and leisure facilities, retirement homes, a wide variety of client sites. And we have a global presence. We do this across 45 countries. About 40% of our business is in Europe. We have over 400,000 employees, and we serve 80 million consumers each day. So this is really interesting. Our position in the value chain as the possibility to be really a catalyst for this transition. And at our scale really gives us the responsibility to act, and we understand the impacts. I think we've been over it several times already, but we understand that food is driving a third of GHG emissions. It's the primary driver of biodiversity loss, nature loss, primary consumer of fresh water, and we should not forget that it's at the center of many human health issues as well. So we understand that, and also at Sodexo's level, even if food service is 55 or 60% of our business, it represents 90% of our climate impact. And that percent is even higher if we look at nature impacts, thinking about land use change, water use, the percentage is even higher. And within that, it's And we break that down even further. It's the products that we purchase that's responsible for a lot of that impact, and in particular, animal proteins, as I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone listening to this event. So Sodexo recognizes this, we understand this, and we have very strong global commitments. We have a global net zero target that's SBTi approved for 2040. And to support that from a food perspective, we have a commitment to have 33% plant-based dishes in our planned menus globally by 2025. And building on that foundation, we're targeting 70% main dishes to be low carbon by 2030. And in addition, we're also have a very historical focus on food waste, targeting a 50% reduction by 2025. And we have several responsible sourcing commitments today. And I'll focus a bit more on the low carbon commitment a little bit later on. And I don't have slides today, so I'm going.
Okay.
No technical difficulty. So those are our commitments, and we also understand this is what our consumers are looking for. Marielle just shared a lot of great consumer insights. We see this in our own research. We've conducted a sustainable food barometer with Harris Interactive the past 2 years across 5 countries: the US, UK, France, Brazil, and India. Thousands of consumers in different segments. And across the board, 74% have a positive view on sustainable food when asked. And I think that's really interesting. This goes to the motivation that Marielle was pointing out, and other speakers today have pointed out. But where I think we come in, whether that's from a policy perspective or from an industry perspective, is to support that desire, whether that's from availability, making it available, making it attractive, making it easy. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, is really about that how, and three insights is what I have in mind to share that's really driving our sustainable food strategy. And I'll give examples of each. So the 3 insights I'd like to share are the power of carbon scoring is back of house with our chefs. Number 2 is nudges over direct communication, which I think we've already heard today and resonates very, very nicely. And training is really essential, but not only chefs. We need to break the silos, and this is really how we're going to accelerate this movement, especially at Sodexo's level. And these are 3 strategies that we use to engage 3 really important audiences: chefs, consumers, and our cross-functional teams. So to speak a little bit more about the power of carbon scoring, when we think about carbon scoring tools, eco-labeling, a lot of times people think about increasing the consumer awareness and giving the consumers information, and with the right information, they'll make the right choices. And I think this is true, but we saw this reflected in the France plan. We need to improve the offer, and we need to improve consumer awareness. And that's really what we see at Sodexo. By giving our chef these tools, we put in their hands the ability to reformulate the recipes before it's even presented to to consumers. So this is really important. And for us, this started with setting definitions and targets. I mentioned that we have a 70% low carbon target for 2030. We define this in the absence of a globally agreed upon definition. We worked with one of our partners, WWF. We've been partnered with WWF on environmental topics for 15 years now, and we worked with them on this project to define a low carbon main dish. A main dish being the protein portion, the sides, and the sauces. And our aim is to be 70% main dishes below 900 grams of carbon by 2030. And we recognize that as a stepping stone for where the world ultimately needs to be, which is 500 grams per main dish by 2050. And that's to put the food industry in line with the reduction, the 1.5 degree scenario reduction of the IPCC reports. So that's the goal, that's the standard that we've set. And this really lends itself to the carbon tools, and using those tools, getting them into the business for our chefs. So when they're looking at recipes, when they're looking at menus, they're managing the cost and they're managing the environmental cost at the same time. And this approach really has several advantages. First, it's raising awareness with our chefs. It's making the environmental impact of their decisions visible in a much more nuanced way. Because of course we can say that plant-based ingredients tend to have a lower impact on the environment, animal products a higher, red meat in particular. But this is much more nuanced feedback and real-time feedback as they're creating the recipes. And second, this approach, it's providing the tools, it's providing the outcome that we're looking for, but it's not dictating the how. And this is really important because we want to leverage the creativity of the chefs. And especially for our business, but I think this is true everywhere, we need to adapt to where we are, what country we're in, the cultural context, and the consumer segment, since we serve so many different consumer segments. So providing the tools, setting the outcome we're looking for, and then letting the chefs use their creativity to solve that puzzle. This is what's really interesting. And third, the advantage of this approach is with these tools, with the measurement, we're able to manage this impact at the local level, at the site level, and centrally. So we can see the impact at a site, at a menu. We can communicate and report internally. We can engage our clients using this information to open up the conversation about how we need to adapt the menu to reduce the impact, etc. So this is a really promising approach, and we're advancing in getting these tools out into our business. We're integrating them centrally across our biggest businesses in the US, in the UK, in France, across Europe, and also Asia Pacific. And we're speaking to our teams in South America about what could be a solution there as well, because that will be crucial as well. And we already have the tools on hundreds of sites across our European business, because Europe is really ahead on this topic in terms of the understanding, the service providers that are here to support. So Europe is really the leader in our business on this topic. And just to kind of bring this to life, I can mention one example of really what this looks like in practice. One of our really leading inspirational chefs from Sweden, Chef Oscar, has been using these tools for a number of years and is a big proponent of them. So when he took his baseline several years ago, he found that his average main dish was 1.5 kilos of CO2. To remind you, 900 grams was the threshold that we set. This was, of course, before we set the threshold. And over the period of a couple of years, he reduced his average dish to 600 grams. And he's in a corporate segment at a major restaurant serving 800 consumers every day. So not so kind of a at scale example. And he's really positive about what the tools brought. It, of course, brought the insights, but what's interesting is his feedback is it brought the motivation. This is a 2-year example I'm giving, so this is not a change you just make overnight. But the tools and having the feedback and the data and the trends, this was a motivating factor that allowed him and his team to keep working on it, feel challenged, and eventually achieve a very promising result. So we're very positive about the potential for these tools as engagement tool, awareness raising tool to reformulate the products and the recipes before they're presented to consumers. And this leads to the second insight that I mentioned, which is nudges over direct communication. When we think about engaging consumers, we'll often think we want to speak to consumers. We need to bring the facts, bring the science, raise awareness to make the link with food and the environmental impact. This is absolutely what we need to do. I was very encouraged to see the French policy plan with integrating into French classrooms. This is really positive. It's absolutely a conversation we need to have as a society. But in the restaurant, and especially to hungry people, I'm not sure that that's the right moment. I think that the restaurant is the place to experience sustainable food. And this is why I think that nudging is so key in the restaurant environment. And this, we also need to keep in mind what consumers consider when they're making their decision of what to eat on a given day. This is also an insight from the study that we conducted. It was very clear results. In order, it's about price, it's about taste, and it's about health in that order. And much below is sustainability. So it's there, it's on the list. But I think it makes sense. You know, sustainability facts is not what makes your mouth water. You know, and I think we accept that, and we can use that information for how we present the sustainable dishes to make them as attractive as possible and most likely to be chosen. And that leads us to the nudges, many of which we've already heard today. I did hear one line recently that I'd like to paraphrase, which is, we need to use the science to know where to go, but we need to use flavor to get us there. And I actually think Joanna which maybe will be a line that I'll steal next, which is winning them over with taste. I think that's absolutely the idea here. So first, it needs to look and taste great. This is the absolute basic and first and foundational objective. But beyond that, I would absolutely echo Rune Christopher with the recipe naming. This is something that we've been looking at for a number of years. We've developed a recipe naming toolkit for our chefs, which is available online. We did it with our partner, Food for Climate League, and it gives guidance to our chefs for how to name a recipe. We need to avoid negative exclusionary terms and rather focus on flavor, texture, origin, etc., to make it sound as appealing as possible. So one example from the toolkit is, let's not call it a vegan lentil taco. Let's call it a sweet and spicy chipotle taco. So they're both true, but one might be more appealing, more inclusive, more likely to be chosen by a broader range of people. So recipe naming is certainly a nudge that I agree with, that Sodexo supports, and that resonates with the other presenters' advice. Plant-based default is another one that we're really interested in and have seen great success with. We did a very detailed study in the US with our campuses. On 3 campuses, we did a study with the Better Food Foundation and Food for Climate League. And this was plant-based default. So the students would be proposed 100% plant-based option, but animal protein is available upon request. And the results were really, really positive. But especially if we look at the 2 sites that implemented the program the most fully, similar numbers from what we saw with one of the other presentations. 81% of the students stayed with the plant-based default. Only 19% requested the change. And this led to a 24% reduction in emissions across those 2 sites over the study period. So really positive, and student satisfaction remained the same over that period as well. So great from that result. And this was so positive that the segment decided to scale that initiative to the 400 university campuses that we manage, serving 1 million students every day. And I should also mention that our campus segment in the US has actually gone beyond the 33% plant-based target. They're actually targeting 50% plant-based menus by 2025. So they're really, this is a population that, you can't go fast enough. So making it taste and look good, naming it, making it more available. This is the key way that once we have those sustainable choices, this gives it the best possible chance of being chosen. So nudges being a really powerful way to do that. And the final insight that I'd like to give is related to training, and that we need to train. I think it's well understood that we need to train chefs. We saw that echoed throughout the discussion today. Chefs, there's new ingredients that we need to be able to work with, new cooking techniques. I think this is well understood. But in addition to that, what we see at Sodexo is that we need to train all of our support functions as well. If the chefs aren't supported, if the rest of the business doesn't understand what they're doing, it's not going to happen. We need the people who are selling our offers, who are engaging with clients, to be on board with this. So we have a great example of how we address this issue in Sodexo Europe. We developed a sustainable eating masterclass that brings together chefs, dietitians, sales, marketing, supply, sustainability teams, brings them all together for a 4-day training on sustainable eating and how to promote plant-based proteins. Over the 4 days, everyone gets the core of that, the why, the what. Of course, the chefs go more in detail about the how, focusing a lot on how to maintain the nutrition, how to maintain satisfaction, taste when developing a plant-based recipe. The support functions, while the chefs are doing that, will work on an action plan so that when they return to the business, they have a plan to present to their executive committee. And they're aligned so that when they come back, they don't just revert to business as usual. So this is really interesting. And so far, we've deployed this training to 9 European countries, about 90 learners. And it's a train-the-trainer model. So when they come back to their country, they can engage their teams in the local language, in the local context, based on what they learned from that central training. Belgium was one of our first countries to do this in 2023, and they've since trained 96 more of their colleagues, and they have now 6 chef trainers to further disseminate the content. And the feedback of this course is really inspiring. My personal feedback when I went to this was it's just incredible. The motivation in the room, tasting the dishes, really gives you the sense that the transition is possible. I went to this a while ago. It still gives me the motivation today, just from what I witnessed on that day, and the feedback from the teams is really positive as well. What really strikes me is comments about how they really get this feeling of one team, how it's really unique that it's not just operational people being trained, people from the headquarters are coming together and they're all coming together around one topic. And I think that's what's really interesting about this approach is that we're not just teaching skills. When we're bringing everyone together like that, it's really about culture change. And that really can impact the decisions that we make every day. So those are the 3 insights that and examples that I wanted to share with this group. There's one more example and resource that I wanted to share. About a year ago with the WWF, we did a very collaborative project defining all the key levers for the food service industry to pull to support this transition to sustainable eating. It's called Sustainable Eating, Pulling the Levers in Food Service. And we identify 9 key levers, which functions are responsible, who leads, who supports for each one, what are common barriers, how to overcome, best practices, and then wider stakeholder engagement about the enabling environment, et cetera. So would like to tell everyone about that resource. And I'd just like to conclude that today we've heard a lot of great the policy examples that we've heard are very strong, and I think when we combine that with what's working operationally, this is how we can really accelerate the transition, and it can really lead to a change that's really lasting. So thanks a lot for having me, and I'd be very happy to take any questions with the time that's allowed.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for this feedback and a lot of examples. Very, very interesting. So you can always ask some questions. I may, yes, there is a comment from Muriel Vérin, which is one of our previous speaker. She said that they did also similar studies with flipping the default in restaurants. And they also found that this is a very powerful nudge, one of the most promising strategies in out-of-home context. And I have also questions about that. Are you planning to extend the default strategy to other countries in campuses other than the US?
Yeah, we're looking at that. Part of their plan to scale it is needing to have that operational guidance of how to do this. So we can take that guidance and look at, does it work for other segments, expand this out to other countries and other segments. And
what will be the first countries to be where it will be implemented? Do you know? In Europe?
Yeah, I think UK and France would be logical choices for us of where to go first.
Yes, in UK there is a movement of universities going plant-based, so they are already.
Yeah, we have a lot of it. We have experiences with schools, with universities, working with WWF on some initiatives to promote sustainable eating already, and we're also taking that work to the hospital segment this year. So yeah, there's already similar work in place, and that could be. That's kind of what our job is at the global level, is to take that resource from the US and to inspire the teams in the UK and vice versa.
Great. I don't know if there is some other question, and I've one last question, but I can still ask your questions. You spoke about the carbon scoring, telling us that it was a very useful tool for the cooks. But I wanted to know if you have assessed also the impacts on consumers, on the consumers' choices. Is it effective to lower the carbon impact of their meals?
This is the big question, and it's starting
because there are several studies on the subject, but are not on the same page.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an area that needs to be studied more. We're starting to look at it, but it's my view is the same as yours, that the information is only starting to come. It seems like it's similar to the impact of nutrition labels, but environmental labels, it's maybe helpful, but it needs to be studied more. So we're looking at it, but we haven't completed any studies yet. But we'll certainly work to make those public, because we know that that's really important to build that body of knowledge.
Yeah, it would be good to share that. Just to be precise, you told us about the goals of 33% of plant-based meals by 2025. Is it global for each country where you are working? And do you monitor this each year to see the improvements?
Yes, it's a global target. It doesn't mean that we expect every country to be at 33% by next year. We want to be on average at 33%. So, India is further, US, you heard the examples, campus segment will be further. France probably won't be at 33%. It's a mix of plant-based, vegetarian, plant-forward in France. Brazil as well probably won't be at 33%.
But do you share the figures of each country?
We don't share the figures by country, but we do, since the past couple of years, we give an annual result, and internally we track it every quarter at the country level and even at the country segment level, because that's where the menus are created.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm looking if there is some more question. Yes, it's a point of actuality. What is your actual French catering strategy after the ANSES publication about soy? You know that ANSES.
Yes, I saw the study. I heard the response earlier.
This is very hot.
Yes, and I'm not aware of Sodexo France's response to this. So I'm sorry, I can't.
Well, thank you. So no more question. You have a chance to ask whatever you want to a representative of Sodexo. No? Okay. Thank you very much again, Nicolas.
Thank you.
And I will now call Marc-Anton, which yes, you present yourself and you conclude this afterwards.
Yes, thank you, Céline. No, just to finish, I would like to conclude very rapidly this very inspiring session as president of Protein Nutrition Group. So first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers. We greatly appreciated your contribution and the time you invested to prepare them. Also, thank you, Céline, for having moderated and organized the discussion, and all the team of GPN and Droit Devant for the other organization. We have seen that this afternoon, we have seen that despite some specificities due to the context of each of the 5 countries represented here today, there is a good alignment between the objectives to be achieved, the strategy to be put in place, and the indicators of success of these national policies. And also, regardless of the context of each country, everyone is aligned with healthier, safer, more sustainable, and more tasty food, and all have defined targets to reach, whether in terms of cultivated areas, education, obligation to have vegetarian options in collective catering, lower VAT rates, and so on. Obviously, depending on the country, the road to be taken or the obstacles to be overcome could be slightly different, but remains broadly the same. So specifically this afternoon, I have noted 3, for me, very important points. First, the case of collective caterings shows us that this can be a very interesting lever to use through national legislation, evidently. But we have seen an example of not just strategies. So for me, it was very, very interesting. Second point, the power of education is very crucial and represent also another lever for changing habits. And third, all these strategies should be implemented with stakeholders and not against them. For me, it's a very, very important point. So to really conclude, I could say that the challenge of feeding 10 billion people by 2050 is huge. But for the first time in history, all the players, farmers, processors, distributors, chiefs, and citizens, with the support of strong public policies, are part of this desire to accelerate the transition to plant-based protein diets. So again, from the GPN group, I would like to thank all the participants in this conference. And now we can close this session. Céline, if you agree.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree.
So goodbye. See you. And
thank you all for attending this webinar.
Yes.
It is recorded, so you will have access to the replay.